Good evening, and welcome to the Facebook Live Milford Readers and Writers Festival, Doing It Right. I'm Edson Whitney, and I have the honor to be the co-chair of the festival, along with Carol McManus and the amazing group of talented and committed board and committee members who are bringing this event to you, the readers, for the 5th consecutive year. But before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that today is September 11th, and to remember and honor those we lost 19 years ago today. Despite the pandemic, we're excited that we can take the festival global this year with our virtual platform and bring the festival to you wherever in the world you are. First, I'd like to thank Greater Pike Community Foundation and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts for their generous support. Now, for those of you who have not attended before, this festival is focused on the readers. Our tagline says it all: readers, writers, conversation. You'll note that the readers come first, inspiring and engaging in conversation with the authors and with each other. We have a lot of conversations to inspire you with this weekend, 3 evenings of conversation at 7:30 Eastern Time and 1 afternoon on Sunday at 1. You, the viewers, can hit the share button and tag your friends in the comments to share these amazing conversations as we're live now. So we're very excited to begin the weekend this evening with Gloria Steinem. Gloria headlined our inaugural festival 5 years ago and has graciously returned for this event. Gloria needs no introduction as the icon of the women's movement and a tireless voice for women everywhere. Founder of Ms. Magazine, among her other pioneering accomplishments, Gloria will be interviewed by her longtime friend and first editor of Ms. Magazine, our own festival co-founder and board member, Suzanne Levine. The topic of the conversation is how the women's vote can shape the election. A lot has happened, as we all know, since Gloria was last here in 2016. Multiple crises that were unanticipated and unprecedented. Tonight, the conversation is very timely as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage by looking at how the gender gap may play out in November. So the format is the conversation will be for 45 minutes, followed by questions from you, our audience. You can post your questions in the comments, and they'll be posed by Amy Ferris, another festival co-founder and board member. While all the events are free, your donations are welcome and are fully tax deductible via the donate link in the comments or on our website at milfordreadersandwriters.com. So we were just in the green room with Gloria and Suzanne. They're very excited, as are we all, to bring you our first virtual Readers and Writers Festival. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Now sit back and enjoy the conversation, and let's all welcome Gloria and Suzanne.
There we are. Hello, hello. Thank you, Edson, very much for that wonderful introduction of our festival and us. I just want to thank Gloria also for coming back. Who knew that the last time she was here, we were getting ready to celebrate the first woman president. We had no idea that we would not only not achieve that, but within those 4 years, go through some tumultuous and exciting activism. There was the Women's March in Washington, which was a show of strength and inspiration. There was the Me Too movement, which brought into the consciousness a problem that had been going on for a long time. Black Lives Matter, again, another issue that we are grappling with. And if that's not enough, we have a plague. So it's been quite a time, and it's almost inconceivable that happened in such a short period of time. But what I'd like to do is start back in ancient history to give people some context. There it goes. So I thought we could start when we met, which was 1972. We were working on the first issue of Ms. Magazine. We were in that funny little office on Lexington Avenue that was furnished with three-legged desks and orange crates. And I remember when I walked in, you were sitting on the floor in the back room. And I have to tell you, don't remember this, I'm sure. But just to show how long ago this was and how times have changed, here's where I was when I walked in that door. I was wearing a pink silk blouse, a pink pencil skirt, and a girdle. And didn't take long to realize that times were changing. And so I thought we could talk a little about what the world was like back then when we walked into that little funny office.
Well, I have to point out, Suzanne, that when you walked in, you were the only one of us who had actually been the head of an entire magazine and published an entire magazine. And from that day forward, you have been truly the editor of Ms. Magazine, way more than I, who was always off on the road, bringing back little scraps of paper saying, oh, this could be a story, that could be a story. and you were running the magazine. But
those little pieces of paper are hardly insignificant. You brought back ideas that helped us all move forward. So you shouldn't do that. Women shouldn't do that, belittle themselves.
No, but I mean, just in real life, who the editor was, but it was you. But also, there had been no other women's, or to put it another way, women's magazines were not owned and controlled by women. They were essentially, and to some extent they still are, although it's improved, catalogs of clothing and household goods, and, you know, depending on the magazine, catalogs of things women should buy. And there was hardly any editorial material. There might be an article, maybe a short story or a poem. Actually, the poems and the short stories had pretty much disappeared by the time we started Ms. So I just want to emphasize that our motivation for starting the magazine is an indication of where we were then, which was the revolutionary nature of having a publication that was owned and controlled by women and that could publish articles and fiction and poetry, and we hoped would come into women's homes like a friend, because it would be on the newsstands and it would be in the mail. And this was very revolutionary at the time. All right, now we have the web, and hopefully at least some of the web comes into women's homes as a friend, though I'm afraid some also comes in as an adversary, right?
Well, but wasn't always interpreted as a friend. We heard from so many women who said, I left my magazine out and on my desk, and my coworkers freaked out, or I got it in the mail and my husband opened the mail and he freaked out. There was a lot of keeping the magazine to ourselves because
Yes.
it was very challenging.
Yes, because clearly, I mean, this was a feminist magazine. It was women who supported equality for women. And this was quite bizarre. I remember we used to get requests from women who said, could you send it in a plain brown wrapper?
Right.
Right.
But just to put the larger context, here were some of the circumstances that women were dealing with at that point. I had just gotten married, so that meant that I couldn't get a loan without my husband's signature. If I wanted a job, I had to look into the Help Wanted Female column, where there certainly were not the same kind of appealing jobs that there were on the other page. Gloria was talking about renting an apartment the other day, about single women weren't allowed to rent an apartment because they were afraid they were prostitutes. So, Gloria, you had some other examples.
Well, you're talking about credit cards. I had to get my mother to sign to guarantee an American Express card for me, even since I wasn't married. I had no husband to guarantee it, right? Even though I supported my mother.
Right.
I mean, it was quite irrational. And also I remember that I had been part of Show magazine, an arts magazine that only a few people may remember. And one of the editors there, who was a friend who I knew very well, called up a friend of mine once we started Ms. and said, I didn't know Gloria was a lesbian.
Right.
I mean, there was here, I think the crux of it was that because people couldn't imagine an equal relationship, or few people could imagine an equal relationship between men and women, if you were a feminist, you must be anti-male or somehow rejecting any relationship or even friendship with men. Now, I say that because we are way past that.
Right.
And the vast majority of women now consider themselves feminists, and many men also consider themselves feminists. So one of the good things about being old, which I am, is that we remember when it was worse. Okay, so we can bring optimism, I feel, and young women can bring anger, which certainly everything now deserves anger. And that's why we should organize together.
Whose line was it when somebody said to her, are you a lesbian? And she said, are you the alternative?
Oh, that was the wonderful Florence Kennedy.
Florence Kennedy.
Right. A great civil rights activist and civil rights attorney, and my speaking partner for many years. I hope people who don't know her will Google her and get to see her in her wonderful Aussie hat and so on.
Yeah, she was great.
Right. And because we were speaking together, and it was so bizarre to some people that two women were speaking together, and perhaps especially a Black woman and a white woman speaking together, that some guy in the back of the auditorium did yell out, are you lesbians? And she said, quick as a flash, are you my alternative? And it was perfect because people fell out laughing.
Well, as you said, laughter is a very important ingredient of revolution.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you point that out, because I think it's very, very misunderstood. Or to put it another way, laughter isn't taken seriously, shall I say? But it turns out, and I think the Native American cultures could teach us this, that laughter is the only free emotion. It's the only emotion that can't be compelled. You can make somebody afraid, obviously. You can even make someone believe they're in love if they're dependent for long enough, because you kind of enmesh in order to survive. But you can't make somebody laugh unless they really want to. So it's a kind of proof of freedom. And it's very precious. So one good rule of thumb, I would say, is don't go any place where they won't let you laugh, even church or temple or whatever.
Amen. But I was also thinking about one of the missions that we gave ourselves was to name some of the conditions that women have been dealing with that we couldn't talk about because they didn't have names.
Mm-hmm.
Sexual harassment, way back then, family violence. I remember you always said we just called it life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was true. I mean, domestic violence, battered women, all these things did not have names. And so naming, as trying to think of the wonderful philosopher, I'll think of her name, naming is the most magical part of our consciousness, just to name something.
Right.
Suzanne Langer, I think, said that, right?
Oh, good for you. A name.
A name.
In the very first issue, you wrote an article called Women Voters Can't Be Trusted. And I think that was the first place where the gender gap, while not named, was described.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I think the assumption had been, and the argument against women's suffrage was that women's votes wouldn't matter because they would vote just like their fathers or their husbands. And at that point, I think you found some numbers that were very dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that Bella Abzug and Shirley Chisholm and others of that time were pointing out that women did not vote necessarily. There was a big gender gap. I mean, Bella, I believe, named it the gender gap. And it was more profound with Black women than with white women. But, in any case, very, very significant. That women were way less likely to vote, say, for military spending and more likely to vote for health, education, welfare kind of spending. That at one point in history was called conservative. Now it's called radical. So the kind of label we get today. Right. But nonetheless, it's been quite consistent that the gender gap makes a huge, or can make a huge difference. And certainly in the last election, when we saw that 96% of Black women voted for Hillary Clinton and 51% of white women voted for Trump. I mean, many more white men certainly voted for Trump. So there was still a huge gender gap there. But it's important to look at that, and it's rarely reported on, even now in the daily press.
How do you account for all those white women who voted for Trump?
Well, I think, to be fair, we have to understand, although Black women were smarter than this, but that after 8 years of one, sorry, I'm hoarse. After 8 years of one party, it's almost always the case that people vote for change for the sake of change. So I think that was probably true of a lot of people. But I think for the most part, they were not college educated, and they were married and dependent on their husband's identity and incomes. So you might say they were voting their husband's interests, mm-hmm. and were either not voting their own interests or considered they were dependent. So their interest was their husband's interest in many cases.
Do you have any sense that some of those women are changing their thinking?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think since it turns out that he has sexually harassed and attacked at least 30 women, And since he so clearly can't deal with women at all, that those numbers have changed.
Well, we'll see.
Including among white suburban women, which is a group that he is counting on and beginning to discover he can't count on to the degree he thought.
Right. There was another interesting statistic in that first article of yours. Women were asked how much they were ready to change or approved of change in itself. And the white women were reluctant. They were like 35%. I'm looking forward to change, and the rest not. Black women were the exact opposite. They were enthusiastic about change and brave enough to want to embrace it. And I think partly that's because their circumstances were certainly in more need of change. But also, I think it's an interesting sense of where we are all coming from. Mm-hmm. You keep talking about change, and I think it's still scary for people.
Yes, well, your point about about need is important. I'm sorry. Apparently, I haven't been talking, so now I'm hoarse.
Do you have a glass of water?
Wait a minute. I have a cup of coffee here, I think. Okay.
Here.
That will help. No, thank you. But I think that what we have come to see is that Black women are the most influential group of voters in the country, the most decisive, because they're the most unified and the most conscious of injustice. And so they have come to be very, very important. And, you know, I think this has helped us to rethink and look at again the history of the women's movement that you and I are talking about, of the current women's movement, because the reporting on it has sort of sometimes behaved as if the women's movement was all white, the civil rights movement was all Black, and actually Black women's history has not been properly accounted for in either one. But in fact, Black women were way more likely to be feminist and support equal rights, and were in the leadership, and we're just beginning. In fact, with two friends of mine, I'm writing a book that's trying to identify the Black women in the 60s and 70s and 80s who were leaders of the women's movement and not properly credited.
Right. I was actually talking to Susan Faludi, who was at the festival last year. And she was talking about how the virus has brought to the fore and reversed a lot of the issues that we thought were settled, like caretaking, like housewifery, like giving up your job to stay home because you had to family violence. Apparently the numbers have really gone way up, and you can't imagine why not, when people are trapped in their houses with family, whether they start out liking them or not. So it gives there's a sort of a sense, I think she was alluding to, that we've lost so much ground that it's going to be hard to get back to where we started.
Well, we've lost ground, but we've also gained vision. You know, I mean, in a way, the virus is a threshold. It has caused us to see divisions of rich and poor and essential workers who aren't paid as if they're essential, And, so it's and why don't we have universal health care, which obviously we need? It's caused us to see many things in a new way. The virus doesn't pay attention to our gender, our race, our class. It doesn't pay attention to national boundaries either. Why do we? I think we can't change what happens, but we can use what happens. So I'm hoping that we can use this consciousness that we have now because of this, totally unexpected and unrivaled and amazing and tragic circumstance that we are in, to change our consciousness, to understand the importance of universal health care, to understand that national boundaries don't matter. We're all citizens of spaceship Earth. So that's the challenge to me, to not to try to change what happens, but to figure out how can we use this.
And how can we get from here to there?
Well, part of it is what you and I are doing now. It's just consciousness. And for instance, so I'm sorry, because men have been home more, doing more childcare, there's more understanding of what it takes and what it means, to live with babies and small children. And of course, men become whole people by developing patience and attention to detail and all those things that are wrongly called feminine, just like we become whole people by becoming more daring or assertive outside the home. So I think it's causing more, it could be causing more wholeness in the attitudes of men and boys, because we are together in a way, and they are seeing the household as their universe in a way that they never saw before. But I think the key to it is figuring out how we can use what's happening, and also getting rid of the shoulds. We too often have a case, what should I do? As opposed to thinking, whatever I can, how can I reflect what I want in what I do every day?
Well, how is that going to play out in the next 2 months? What are you looking for in terms of?
Well, obviously the virus we have in the White House is is extremely dangerous. I mean, he lied to us about the other virus, as we now know. He totally knew how dangerous it was, and lied so that he could perhaps keep the economy. But it's insane. I think it's clear from the public opinion polls that he is going to lose, and it's also clear to him, which means we have to worry about the postal system, or any of the ways we vote, because clearly, as all of his former henchmen have pointed out, he will do anything in order to win. I kind of have visions of trucks taking away the post office boxes. We may have to guard our post office boxes. But I mean, the good news is that a righteous turnout will defeat him. The bad news is that we don't know what he will do to the voting system.
I'm learning a lot about the voting system in all of this process. I wasn't aware, for example, that you could vote in person early. And that there are polling centers, but there are places you can go, and it's exactly the same process. And your vote is in the system. I think there's a lot of educating that people are doing, young people, that's also going to make a difference. I certainly hope that we will bring out this generation that we are counting on.
Yes, because obviously young people, it's most important that young people vote, even though they vote less than older people, because they're going to be around for the consequences way longer than we are. There's a lot of information online, as you point out. There's also a very good documentary that I recommend, and you can find online, called All In. And it's the story of Stacey Abrams' campaign and the voter suppression efforts in Georgia, which were quite extreme. It's very, very educational and helpful.
Uh-huh. And you are the greatest fortune cookie writer. And every time you say something serious, I think of something funny that you said.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
Or memorable, like all of the excerpts that are in your current book, with the title, with one of your best lines. The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. Everybody should make sure to read that book.
Yeah, it's a book of quotes. Most, the title is mine, but the quotes are lots of different people, right?
Well,
my favorite quotes, right?
There's some are yours. But I'm thinking of also kind of words of wisdom that, like, we are linked, not ranked. I think that's one of your most important concepts. And maybe you could explain that. It sounds so simple, but it really isn't.
It is the shortest way I've ever been able to think of saying what I believe is the truth, and also what we are striving to recreate. I mean, I think cultures that were more circular than hierarchical were here before Europeans showed up, as we know from Native American systems of governance. And I think we're trying to recreate them in a new way. So it is the shortest way I've ever been able to say. There's some virtue in shortness. You can put it on T-shirts, you can carry it on banners and marching, right. Which is that we are linked, literally. We are not ranked like this. And the whole idea of ranking because of the degree of melanin in our skin, which only has to do with whether we were in sunny climates historically or not, or because of our gender, or because of our class, is relatively new in human history. And as I was saying about COVID doesn't see it. COVID doesn't see those things. So maybe we can use COVID as a change in consciousness to move toward our understanding that we are linked, not ranked.
It's a wonderful concept. To go somewhere totally else and ask you a question that I know you've been asked before. Here you are, portrayed in multimedia with all these different people playing you. And I know that the Glorias, the Julie Taymor movie, is coming out at the end of September. It's going to be on Amazon, I believe.
Yes.
And I've seen it. It's wonderful. And I think Julianne Moore absolutely gets into your skin. There were times in the movie where I wasn't sure which of you it was. Because she has so...
She looks better.
What?
She looks better, you have to say.
No, she had a lot of your mannerisms, and I can't imagine. That must be weird when the other, places where you've been portrayed, you didn't look like you and you didn't act like you, so it wasn't so weird. But this is very strange, I would think.
Well, here's how it started. Julie Taymor, who, besides The Lion King, did many other genius plays, and Frida, and you know, so many things. She called me a few years ago and said she wanted to option my Life on the Road, a book I wrote called My Life on the Road. And she's the only person on earth to whom I would say what I did, which is fine. You can do anything you want. Because, first of all, she's, I think, the great filmmaking genius of our time. And secondly, I knew she would tell the emotional truth. Whether, you know, the kind of facts here and there, you know, matter way less than the emotional truth. And she has done that. And she has reproduced my father, who was the least responsible man on earth and the most loving, kind-hearted father. And she's reproduced that. And she's done it on 2 continents, not just here, but also in India, where I was for a couple of years after I graduated from college. And I think she understood that because she did the same thing. She also, as a young woman, went to Asia and lived there for several years. As you can see in her art form, you can see in The Lion King and so on, how much that influenced her.
Right.
So that the movie is really a tribute to her ability to tell the emotional truth. It's profoundly, it's not even in the same universe, say, with something like Mrs. America. I don't know if anybody is aware of that. It was a television series.
A lot of people saw it. Yes.
Yeah, it was about the premise of the series was that Phyllis Schlafly had defeated the Equal Rights Amendment, which was a false premise. She never changed one vote. It was the insurance industry and people who were going to lose money because of the Equal Rights Amendment that defeated the Equal Rights Amendment. So those are 2 polar opposites.
Yeah, I think people don't know about the insurance industry, the role they played. I know you've written about it now, but we've got the Equal Rights Amendment again in play, which is very exciting.
Well, and all the requisite 38 states have ratified it. All we need to do is win the next election, and then we will finally have it in the Constitution, only 50 years after we have been working on it.
Well, isn't there some kind of a movement to withdraw some of those votes?
Well, the problem is that a deadline was put,
right?
So that has to be removed because, you know, other amendments did not have a deadline, but Congress put a deadline on this. So that's why we have to win the election in order to finally get it into the Constitution, because the Republican Party opposes it and the Democratic Party supports it. There are some Republicans who do support it, but it's just not enough to be sure, right?
Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a big supporter right from the beginning. She always thought that was very important.
Absolutely. She certainly knows how important it is. Yes.
Let me go somewhere else. Somebody asked me, and I love this question, what would you tell your 20-year-old self from the vantage point of where you are now?
Oh, that's so difficult, isn't it? I mean, but my instinct, my first instinct is to say, it's going to be all right. And I guess part of the underlying beneath that thing, I would say, is that I believe when I was in my 20s and 30s, and there really wasn't yet a women's movement, I was rebelling, but hoping no one would notice. I mean, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. But I thought I was by myself in this. And then fortunately, the women's movement, the civil rights, came along and gave us company and companionship and a family. But at that point, I didn't know that. So that's the kind of underpinning of saying it's going to be
It'll
all
be
right.
all right. It's funny, for me, it just jumped into my mind right away. I would
What
say,
would you say?
don't waste so much time trying to make people like you. I mean, when you think how much energy and time we have spent trying to not only make people like you, but make people feel good about themselves, about you. I mean, a lot of time that could have been spent figuring out who we are. So that's that. I would
No, you're
urge
right.
my young self not to go down that road.
Your suggestion is maybe more practical than mine, because you're right. Because any group that is secondary because of sex or race or class or whatever it is made to feel dependent on the approval of the powerful group. And that is a very sinister way of internalizing the hierarchy.
Right. Thinking of something Bella Abzug said, thinking of dependence. She said, we've gone from dependence to independence, and now we have to move toward interdependence.
Yes, absolutely.
Which I always thought was a wonderful way of seeing
it. Absolutely. Sometimes I think the world is divided into two kinds of people, people who divide it into two and those who don't. So usually that bipartite thing is really a disaster. And she pointed that out.
Right.
Because it's the third unifying alternative that's important.
Right. So here we are. People are getting ready for this election. Can we come up with some specific things that people can try to do? I mean, as you say, nobody can do what they can't do. But I think there are a lot of creative suggestions out there that could be very helpful to people who are just sort of, what can I do? I'm freaking out.
Well, one thing is, you can, depending on where you are, vote as soon as you can. I mean, some people can already vote, but, of course, they used to say vote soon and often. No, you can't do that. but do vote soon. Secondly, try to make sure that the people in your circle, online, in your neighborhood, to whoever you have access to, has the information they need to vote, because your word to them, to someone is way more credible, influential, and important than anything that we see distant, from on screen or from a stranger. The word of someone we trust is the most activating force, and we can all use that.
It's hard to make contact though with people who don't even want to hear it.
You mean don't want to vote at all?
No, don't want to hear what you have to say. I mean, I think that's one of the problems that we're having now, that we're so far apart that it's hard to exchange ideas.
Well, we're not far apart. I mean, we're far apart, but remember, it's 30 versus 70, not 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
It's the 30% of the country that is racist. Let's face it. I mean, Trump is a profound racist that is against or feels anyway threatened by equality of race and sex. I mean, it's or feels that there is a hierarchy for religious reasons. The evangelicals are the most consistent supporters of Trump. It's not about changing them. They have a perfect right to feel as they feel, though we should always talk to each other, I agree, and do our best to make human contact. it's about getting out and vote because the majority in a democracy, the majority wins.
Well, I think we're getting close to question time. And Amy Ferris is going to come in and read some of the questions that we've gotten. So I just want to say this has been fun. And to quote you, fucking-tastic.
Yes,
so
one of my favorite quotes.
I have to do it again.
Well, Suzanne, I'm so glad to see you. Thank you for doing this. I'm in California, I can explain to people, so I don't get to see you, right? And I want to say can I say thank you for this book festival? You know, one of the things I've noticed is that in all of this time of tragedy, books have become ever more important, you know, because, you know, they're personal and portable and we're home with them. And I notice that when people are photographed at home, they generally, I mean, I'm not at home. So anyway, they're photographed in front of their bookshelves.
Right,
Have you noticed that? Right.
Right.
Right. So I think the importance of books and of this wonderful annual festival has been increased in these times.
I think that's absolutely right. Amy?
Yes.
Are we there? There she is, Madam Amy Ferris, who I'm sure.
Have you both, God, amazing. And just thank you. Thank you, Gloria, for being everything that we all want to be.
Oh, no.
And Suzanne, you know how I feel. So you're my goddess warrior. All right, I am going to start with this question, okay? And I'd like both of you to answer it. This is a critical moment in Black-white relations. How can I, as a privileged white woman, best work with my Black sisters in this upcoming presidential election?
Suzanne, do you want to? I've been talking.
I'm sure you, go ahead.
Well, you know, I think, you know, when you started the question, the first thing that was coming to mind is that we assume somehow, because it is a racist system and because there is white privilege, that it's somehow good to be white, if you know what I mean. But I think it's helpful when we as white people understand that if there were only 100 people in the world, you know, when they do that, you know, only 30 of them would be white. I mean, do we really want to be isolated with only 30 people and not get to know everybody else? You know, I think if we see it as positive and enriching and, you know, not how shall I say, not guilt producing but something we're ourselves motivated to do, then it will be helpful. Now, what form that takes in voting depends on how perhaps we can help make sure that access to voting is the same, especially for those who are still going to vote physically. The access is more difficult in Black areas than it is in white areas. And we can do our best to work on that. We can be in touch with our local get out the vote structures and ask what we can do.
I guess one thing that I have learned or become aware of that I think is important is that we've got to stop asking Black people to explain Blackness to us. That's not their job. And I think that sets up a kind of a chasm that they have something, that their life is something that is so incomprehensible to us that they need to explain, or that we expect them to invest the energy in enlightening us when we all have a lot of important things to do to change the system. So I don't know how that affects voting, but it has certainly affected my sensibility.
Well, that is going to lead into this question, okay? Which, and this is for both of you again. What are your views on the role of the male allies in advancing true equality for women, especially in the era of the Me Too movement?
Well, look, there's this radical idea that we're all human beings. Hello. And so we all have a right to our own bodies and not to be touched or invaded if, uninvited. Sometimes I think that the men that could help other men understand it the best are the men I've met, say, after a lecture. Sometimes a man will wait until everyone is gone and come up to me and tell me that he had been imprisoned and he had learned in prison because he was younger or weaker and was used as a woman sexually because there were no women. He had learned that body invasion is even more traumatic than being beaten up on the outside. Mm-hmm. So, if he says that to other men, I think it's helpful perhaps as a bridge to understanding the trauma that women experience from being touched or invaded without our permission or wanting.
Suzanne?
Well, I think they are in need of what we have all been in need of when this movement has been developing, is making contact with each other. To use your phrase, Amy, sharing their truths. I think if men, as Gloria said, could be liberated from the armor that they're in, which I think a lot of men are. I think there are a lot more men who understand and want to change the world the way we do. I think the gravity has shifted, and there are a lot more of them than those ones who used to try to make us cry. But I do think that there's an opportunity for men to share with each other and give each other that kind of sense that you're not alone and you're not crazy.
Mm-hmm. And that it's the so-called masculine role is actually killing men. That removing those ideas of violence and speed and competition and so on will lengthen men's lives. What other movement can offer men more years of life? Right. Exactly. I think this can, right.
So coming off of that, who are the young feminists most inspiring both of you right now? Who are they?
Oh, there's so many. I hesitate to even begin to name. I mean,
you need to name.
What?
You need to name some.
No, I really can't, because there are just so many. I mean, here's how I feel, basically. I feel like I just had to wait for some of my friends to be born. And so, and I think especially I'm inspired by current little girls of 9 and 10 who I meet some here because now I'm in the countryside in California, who haven't even encountered the feminine role yet and are completely themselves and are also aware of what's coming, unlike, we've just assumed we had to conform.
Right.
And I'm so encouraged by them.
Suzanne.
What I don't have names either. I mean, you can't ask either of us to remember a name, but I do think that what I find inspiring is how smart these young women are, and how confident and how experienced. I mean, we were babes in the woods trying to figure out how to make this revolution. And they've got strategy, and they've got alliances, and they've got power. A lot of them have a good amount of power. So that I think they're going to be able to do what needs to be done in a much more effective way than we did. We did the best we could. I think they're going to do the best they could too.
Well, you have an amazing daughter who's, she's following very much in your incredible warrior footsteps. So
she's the best. She is the best.
She is.
So, I agree, and she's not my daughter, and I still think
I know you do. All right, so this is from Diana Weiner, who we all love because she was she was right at the beginning of Readers and Writers and championed us and was involved with us and all of that great stuff. So this is her question. Didn't that same group of white women that voted their husband's interests in 2016 support Obama in 2008?
Some of them did, but I mean, there's a crossover there. So, which is a good point, because it's redeeming, I would say. But some of them were voting for change for the sake of change. That's why I pointed that out, because after 8 years of one party, and there was 8 years of Obama, there is an impulse, the historical impulse, to vote for change for the sake of change. And when you asked a lot of women, they also tended to say, well, he's a successful businessman, so he'll know how to run the country. Mm-hmm. Now, those of us who live in New York City know that he's a failure as a businessman, that if he had just invested the money he inherited, he'd be richer than he is now. But people didn't know that, mainly because he was on television constantly as if he were a successful businessman. So, that without that kind of false publicity, I don't know if he could have won.
Suzanne?
Next question, please.
So this is from Mary Jo Thomas. And what do you see as the biggest challenge for women in the next 20 years? I'm going to let you go first, Suzanne.
Oh, come on, Amy.
Joking. Go ahead. That's a big question.
It is a big question. I think the biggest challenge is to find for each woman to find the issue that matters most to her and fight for it alongside all the women who are fighting for other issues. I think that it used to be thought that there was a feminist agenda and that there were 10 points that needed to be enacted. I think now people are saying, where is the women's movement? And it is all over the place. It's in multiple movements. And the only thing I worry about is that we support each other and don't turn on each other. We used to call it horizontal hostility. And it's such a waste of time. I think the two things that are the biggest waste of time are horizontal hostility and reinventing the wheel, starting from the beginning in every project and not taking the time or being aware of how it was all figured out before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just think we need to reverse the golden rule, if you know what I mean. I mean, and understand that we are as important as anyone else, that the point is balance. That, and of course we need to do our best to stay physically safe and help each other to stay physically safe. And aside from that, I would say to do what you love. You know, what do you love so much you forget what time it is when you're doing it? That's probably what you should be doing.
Well, I'm going to ask both of you a question that isn't on the comment list, so I know I'm going to get in trouble. But what do you think Bella Abzug would? How would she be today? What do you think?
Gosh, I wish she were here. Don't you wish?
Oh,
I asked that because Suzanne and Mary Tom wrote the best book on Bella, and I know that you loved her with all your heart, both of you. And I think of her all the time because I think, what would she do right now? And so
she would be zooming her way around the country and around the world, fist up, saying, we have to get this guy out of the way. We have to vote. We have to, boycott economically. She would just be incredibly active and the queen of Zoom.
But I think the big question is, where is Bella Abzug now that we need her? I don't see anybody who is in that role of being, the powerhouse with her shoulders hunched, marching through the halls of Congress, answering the challenges because she knows the rules of the game better than anybody else. I just see her as so fearless and so committed that I miss that. There are a lot of wonderful people, and Nancy Pelosi is wonderful, and there are a lot of people who are stepping up and identifying the trouble we're in. But I just think Bella would have embodied it and would lead us over the mountain.
Yeah, I mean, there are, as you point out, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, there are all kinds of great women in Congress who are in there fighting. But I don't know, maybe we should start a Bella Abzug revolutionary cell.
Yes.
Where's Bella? That's great.
Try to use her spirit to reinforce our own, right?
Yes, that would actually be quite extraordinary. And and again, Suzanne, the book that you co-authored, I think everybody needs to read it.
Well, it was the most fun I ever had because it was a chance to live with Bella for 2 years. And that's why I wish she was here right now.
Well, this is the take-home message of this book festival. Read that book, and then act like Bella. Right?
Well, Gloria, do you think that she would be angry or frustrated at where we are now?
Are you kidding? Of course. I mean, she wouldn't be able to believe. She couldn't believe Nixon was there. She couldn't believe. No, I mean, she would. I mean, I think she would both be angry and frustrated, and she would be figuring out what to do about it. Get rid of the Electoral College. That's the only reason he's there. He lost the popular vote,
right,
by like 3 million votes.
He did.
And the Electoral College was a function of the slaveholding states. They were the only ones who wanted it. And now, I've forgotten how many, at least 15, I guess more states have already rejected it. I mean, she would be out there battling the Electoral College to get democracy once and for all.
Oh, Bella.
So hashtag, we should do that right now while everybody is on Be Bella. Be
What?
Bella. Okay, here's a question from Robin Frank. Since so many of us are voting absentee by mail, we may not know the answer in the election on November 3rd. So what shall we do on November 4th and 5th? And my comment, PS, is drink a lot, but go ahead.
Well, you know, we're on the one hand going to have to be patient, and also on the other hand, we can pursue any cases of wrongdoing or voter suppression that we hear about, and support the whatever our local systems of voter counting are.
How would you recommend we do that?
Well, it's too diverse, I think, you know, because it depends where you are,
Right.
you know, and what the systems are. But if you go online, you will find that kind of information.
Suzanne?
Yeah. Gloria said it all.
Okay. Here's a question for you both. I loved your quote, Gloria, that old women bring optimism and young women bring anger, which why we need to organize together. What do you feel about middle-aged women? Great, that is so great. And
Yeah, I didn't mean to leave out.
Middle-aged, I'm sorry. What do you feel about middle-aged women in particular to bring to the women's movement and the push for change? And actually, we're all middle-aged, so there you have it.
Well,
no, I'm not, but go ahead.
Well, I think that there's a whole generation of women there. I don't know, you know, middle-aged, what does that mean? We're not even ready to accept the word old. But I think there's a generation of women that profited from the women's movement and really made things work and gained power and confidence, but weren't active because they were so busy doing that. And when I think of all the women who came to the march, the Women's March, and I kept hearing people saying, I've never done anything like this before. I wouldn't have come, but my college roommate said, we've got to go. And I think that's a group of women that we're going to be hearing a lot more from. I think Gloria probably knows better, but I bet you a lot of them are the women who have been running for office.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also some very young women have been running for office because they've been activated. But I do think there's still a kind of, even though younger women are more active than ever before in politics, we do as women tend to get more radical with age because we discover that the notions that we were given of what was going to be a proper role are actually more confining. So, you know, I don't want to generalize too much because there are so many more women who are leading individual lives than ever before.
Right.
Who are not having children or have children from other marriages or who or living with other women. I mean, you know, it's just too diverse to generalize about. But we're not going to leave out anybody. And I think in a way, if we're part of a big group and it doesn't look like the country in terms of age and race and class, then we should try to make it look more like the country.
Right. That's a great answer. And so here's a question that goes right into that. Are there lessons you want to make sure younger women learn from your experiences?
I would say don't listen to me. No, really, listen to yourself. I mean, I'm here to help, but I think there's a unique person inside each of us who loves to do something, wants to express talents or hopes or dreams, and listen to that voice within. Don't get a case of the shoulds. I'm here to support you.
I guess what I would wish for every young woman is to have access to Gloria Steinem and her wonderful comments like that. If you can, it's been a blessing to be in your life and to have you in my life. And,
Suzanne.
I would wish that for any young woman who wants to make her own life.
And I would wish that for any young woman in your case. I mean, you by me are a young woman, of course. I'm older than everybody, but no, Suzanne, you are chosen family to me.
Well, we're both lucky.
I'm going to ask, because you just said something that is so profound. You have an amazing friendship, the two of you. You have this exquisite, gorgeous friendship. You started working together and you became really great friends. Do you have advice for women and friendship? Because you two are, you have a whole history here, and you love each other, you respect each other, you honor each other, you hold each other up. And women need to do that right now. We need to be the ones who lift each other and hold each other. And I would love for you to just talk a little bit about your friendship and how you honor each other, because we women need to do that, especially now in the world we're living in.
Yeah, I'm just, as you're saying that, I'm thinking that probably in the culture in general, it's still more okay to honor your partner and your children and your parents and your grandparents than it is to honor your women friends. And I would just like to say profoundly that your women friends are your family, and to honor them and spend time and attention and just make clear that your women friends are your chosen family.
Right.
Well, I think we all know that as we get older, our women friends become more and more important because they're chosen family, but because also we can tell each other the truth. I mean, I don't think I would have gotten this old if I hadn't had a circle of friends I could laugh about it with, right? Actually, there is a scientific justification for this. When women get together, the experience of just enjoying each other's company and trust releases oxytocin, which is called the love hormone or the cuddle hormone. And what it does, besides feel good, is it reduces tension and stress. And in fact, there is a school of thought that the reason women live longer than men is because they have access to these regular doses of oxytocin. So the only pragmatic thing I would say is, if you're busy people, like we all are, make sure that when you get together, you plan your next get together, that you don't wait till everybody goes home and then tries to get organized. And when you get up from the table, pull out your calendars and make sure that you've got another opportunity to look forward to.
And I can testify to the fact that because of the dinners that we have, and I hope we continue to have once this in person, that we always do this, right? Once a month we have dinner, and we then say, okay, here's the date of the next dinner.
That's so gorgeous.
With several others, right? Our
Rob,
friends.
you have what, 5 women that or 6 women that you have dinners with all the time, or did? Yeah.
Yes. No, we do. Right.
All right. So this is going to be, Gloria, this is for you. And this is about the Netflix show, Mrs. America. So I have to ask it. How did you feel about the accuracy of the show? And I've recommended it to many of my work colleagues who are young feminists in their 20s who had never even heard of the ERA. How do you respond to that?
Mm-hmm. I'm sure that it was helpful in introducing people to the Equal Rights Amendment, to many figures, in the women's movement that people did not know. The problem is the fundamental premise was wrong. And if you go online, Eleanor Smeal and I wrote an op-ed explaining why, because the idea of the show is that Phyllis Schlafly defeated the Equal Rights Amendment. And so the premise is that women are each other's worst enemies, when in fact it was the insurance industry and people who stood to suffer economically because of the Equal Rights Amendment that defeated it. So the fundamental premise of the show was wrong, even though it no doubt served a purpose in introducing people to individuals they didn't know.
Did they ask you did they come to you at all and say, this is what we're doing, or? Yes,
they did. The two of the showrunners, producers, got in touch with me, and also I sent them to Ellie Smeal, who actually knows more about the Equal Rights Amendment than anybody, because she was following it state by state. So both of us told them that Phyllis Schlafly, as far as we could determine, never changed one vote, that she was window dressing on the economic interests that stood to lose by defeating the Equal Rights Amendment. And they went right on with the other premise. If you, it was in the LA Times that Ellie and I wrote. You can find it if you like.
No, I read it, and I think we should link it actually.
Oh, good idea.
Right? We should link it. Let's link that. And Suzanne, I know a little bit about how you felt, but would you like to share?
I hated it.
Okay, there you have it.
I think what I hated about it was the way it did not portray the people, the important people. I think the Gloria character was cold. I think the Bella character was kind of wishy-washy. Everybody looked right, but the characters were just so inaccurate that it made me crazy.
Well, I think we should absolutely post the link to your piece that you wrote. And I think we need to have a hashtag #BeBella. And I think that we're ending the Q&A in 1 second. So I want to just thank you both for being here and for being the kind of women they name hurricanes after, and for being so profound. And
we had to fight to get them to name an occasional hurricane after a guy. Remember that? Because
that is very true. That is very true.
Anyway, I thank you so much, and I thank you for this wonderful book festival, and I look forward to us all being together at it next year.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We are going to do that. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And here we go.